So we've got news coming out about a mass resignation from the board of 23andMe. Apparently, there was a big disagreement about the plan that the CEO had to take the company private. At least at its surface, this was what was said, that the board disagreed and said that they didn't want her to take the company private. Um, Lucas, I know that as far as 23andMe, you've had some experience with these guys, right? You actually got a test done. Like I've never done it. I was always very worried about what they were going to ultimately do with that data. I didn't want that in the hands of anybody else, so I never participated in any of these ancestry or 23andMe things. But you had a chance to try it out.
I did. Now I feel a little bit doxxed, but yes, I had a beer bet with my grandfather as to whether I had more Neanderthal genes or he did, and he ended
Who,
up.
who won the bet? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I won the bet. I have. He actually bet me that which was a maybe casting aspersions on my father. This is my mother's dad. That I had more Neanderthal genes that I inherited from my dad. But and then he was unhappily surprised to find out that he had more Neanderthal genes, and my father, who is of Norwegian heritage, had less. So joke was on him. But yes, I was a very very early adopter when 23andMe first came out. Uh, my grandfather is into Stones and Bones, worked for the Museum of Natural History in Denver for many years. And so we were very interested in the science and the possibilities of looking at your DNA. Even when I was in high school, I worked in a lab doing electrophoresis on DNA. So that part of the science was known to me as to what that would be, what was going on behind the scenes, and so I was very excited about it. But to bring it to 23andMe, I bought the kit, and gosh, that must have been in the mid aughts or late aughts of the 2000s, and I seldom go to the site anymore. When we think about what's possibly going on here behind the scenes with 23andMe, there's been a couple of of broader issues that are probably working against 23andMe as a company, and that has to do with there being a large number of people who might have been interested in them as it was a new technology, and that went out and bought subscriptions to or bought the kit to have their DNA transcribed and compared. But then how do they monetize? How do they continue to make money as the number of people who have that service are diminishing? And
Well, it had to have always been in their plan that they were going to do some amount of data aggregation and swoop up data and try to monetize it. I think famously what it was said, data is the new oil. So any company that can swoop up a whole bunch of data, aggregate it together, and do some analysis, that's been the.
I had not heard that data is the new oil. I like that.
Ooh, I gotta find that one. I'll try and find that.
That's a very nice aphorism. So surely it was in the back of their mind, but it wasn't something that they've talked about, and I didn't go through the license agreement that I clicked a check mark on 23andMe, but they may have been also putting some eggs in a possible basket of what kind of services can we provide, um, with a reoccurring fee. So I'm not sure what ancestry.com does, but on 23andMe, it can put you in touch of your fourth and fifth cousins, and I have some great stories about conversations and connections that were made in those regards. But at the end of the day, data is the new oil. Oh, I love that saying. Data is the new oil, and at some point they were going to have to make some decisions with how they were going to have a conversation with the people whose DNA that they had sequenced, and and start to make matches and find clients who were interested in that data.
So apparently it was attributed to British mathematician Clive Humbly. And then he actually has a Wikipedia page. So I'll throw that on the screen too.
I've never heard of him, and look at those British. He's probably a related to Oscar Wilde. So anyway, in when I look at what's happening with 23andMe and the growing pains that they're going through now, it puts me in mind of so many um, uh, other websites.
Well, and just before we go past it, so this was the statement from the board of directors. So this is directly to Anne, who's the CEO, and says, because of that difference and because of your concentrated voting power, we believe that it is in the best interest of the company's shareholders that we resign from the board rather than have a protracted and distracting difference of view with you as to the direction of the company. So I guess this is, the du jour for these big companies these days, right? OpenAI had a similar disagreement amongst the board of directors and the CEO, and it seems like CEOs are wielding some kind of outsized power in this day and age. I thought it was supposed to be the other direction, that the board of directors was responsible for the company and was supposed to hire the CEO, and if they disagree with the CEO, aren't they supposed to fire the CEO? But I guess in this situation, because the CEO has concentrated voting power, whatever that means, that would be interesting to look into exactly how this company is structured. But I'd always thought that that was the point of the board of directors, was that pretty much their only duty was to hire the chief executive officer and to keep a check on that, acting in the interests of the shareholders of the company.
I think of the I think of boards of uh, of publicly traded or even privately traded company differently, and I think of them as providing the what is the phrase that we use with the CIA, the uh, providing reasons to make hard decisions. I mean, in some ways, McKinsey operates like this, but I guess the thing, like, we have this notion of boards as guarding the fiduciary interests of the shareholders, but when we live in a world where the traditional service economy of a business, like providing a service to traditional customers, has been corrupted by this concept of data aggregation, and their true customers being the companies that they're going to sell that data to, it puts boards in a between a rock and a hard place. And
Well, boards have a defined meaning when you declare a company. So like when you first formulate a company and you start putting together the filing with Delaware or whatever state in the United States, the first thing that you do is to actually establish the board. So the company really is the board at its very inception, and that's what you put together. And so there's this idea in creating a new company where you have an incorporator, and that can be anybody. It can be an attorney, it can be one of the people that's making the company. But the only duty of the incorporator is to nominate the board, and then at that point the incorporator steps back and really is not necessarily involved. So this is actually one of the only defined roles in how we form companies, is creating this board. And this idea that you would have a CEO or anything like that is an after fact. It happens after you create the board, and then you hire a CEO and you start getting officers and whatever. And a lot of times it's the same people. People that are on the board of a company when it first gets formed are the C-suite and the people that are founding the company and whatever. But that really is the people that the states identify as the people involved in the company. It is the board. So this idea that they don't have a role or whatever, I mean, that I think is by how we've been treating these companies or how the conventions work. I don't think that the state would view it that way.
Well, I think what happens is the CEO, who is supposed to be, a cheerleader, one who keeps morale up, who states the vision, and
Wait a minute. The role of a CEO is to raise money. That's the job of the CEO, the chief executive officer in most companies. Like if they don't raise money, then the company doesn't exist. That's
well, but in part of that, they need to be keeping an idea on what the operations are in in the business, and in
100%. I think we're talking about maybe slightly different things. I so much always am thinking about how does a startup company work because I've just been doing so many. And so when I think about what does a board mean, what does a CEO, what is the roles of this stuff, it might change significantly after you take something public and then you do something else because now you have public shareholders and whatever. And this fight that's happening in public with these big companies, whether it be OpenAI or 23andMe, just seems inverted to me because my thoughts on this and the way that I think about it is it's sort of company board. Those are the first two things. CEO comes after, and really it's one of the only things that the board can do is to fire the CEO, and that was what OpenAI seemed like they did. They ousted Sam Altman. They said you're not doing what we expected you to do, so get out of here. And I guess that's not really the way that it's viewed. It's so much power is in the CEO these days.
well, I think what is muddying these waters is that it's not that the CEOs are ineffective, but the focus of the business is it needs to change because of this, the emergence of the ability to sell this data, the data aggregation, and the true customer changing. So instead of your customer being all these people that you're amassing the data of, like going out and selling the DNA kits. Instead, it becomes the data of the accumulated accounts that you have in a business.
Can you imagine that though? I mean, imagine if back in the early days of companies, or even just a few years ago, if you bought something like a portable music player, like say a Walkman or an iPod, instead of that product being the thing that you're making money by creating and selling, you're really saying, no, 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 it's not really that. This is a lost leader. All we're really trying to do is swoop up as much information as possible about that person so that we can sell that data later. That's a wild business model. I can't even imagine that. To me, that's almost as bad as what's going on with the technology that's exploding over, you know, in Jordan and whatever, right? Because you bought this piece of technology and you're like, oh, I'm going to use it for my purposes, but you find out that it actually has this bomb in it, and that bomb being that it's collecting all this information about you and it's later going to be used against you. I mean, I don't, when you first got that 23andMe test, did you think that they were going to use that data against you in some fashion by selling it and giving it away and doing stuff with it? I mean, just wouldn't have seemed like the right way to think about it. It's like, I want the product, do the test, give me the test results, then delete the data. I don't want you to keep track of it and then aggregate it. That's not what I was paying for.
Well, I think you're making an assumption when you say against, because you can use the data to be reaching out to pharmaceutical companies and saying, "Hey, we have this tailored data." You could be reaching out to customers who assent to be contacted and saying we could be developing, tailored solutions to some sort of perceived problem that you have with.
Yeah, but that's my data. You know what I mean? That's not your data to do that with. Even if you were to put together terms and conditions that maybe allowed you to do that, that still just doesn't seem right. I mean, if I go to the doctor, right, and I get some sort of a test done, I wouldn't expect that they would keep my medical data, my MRI data, and then aggregate it and sell it off to the highest bidder. Like there's laws that protect us from that.
I mean, this is why maybe we need to find governments that we can trust. You bring up uh, the pagers and the walkie talkies that the Mossad of Israel, it interrupted the supply chain. I mean, we kid ourselves if we don't think that a lot of the technology from phones to the internet and the things that we have don't go straight back to DARPA and the defense industry in the United States. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a huge narrative about the supposed privatization or the private sector that exists in the commercial and corporate sphere, but I don't buy any of it. And I was well aware that my information.
Well, in the supply chain, having worked in a consumer electronics company, right? I absolutely recognize that there is points in the process where nefarious things could occur, right? One is at the assembly, like final assembly. That is where if you had a corrupted agency or a corrupted part of the process that allowed for components that you didn't authorize into your product got in there, or even if you were trying to do some kind of a targeted thing where you said we're going to build certain type of model and then ship it off, but that would be traceable. You could 100% put a finger on that, because there would have been a corruption of a specific set of devices, because otherwise how would you know that you're not putting the wrong devices into the wrong hands and you're going to do the wrong thing? I mean, you wouldn't want to leave bombs in the wrong spots, but maybe they didn't give a crap. Maybe they just said, oh, we're just going to do this like en masse, and who cares about the collateral damage? It sure seems like that might have been what occurred there.
Well, this is a whole other conversation. Let's not get too deep into the to supply chains and um, corruption in a supply chain. But what we are seeing, going back to what's going on with 23andMe and so many other, but especially large corporations, is that they run this track where they are originally providing a service, but the ad market is too strong, and I think that has everything to do with broader interest rates of the central banks and the cost of the we could ask ourselves, why must companies change their business models from selling something and having enough making enough money on that to perpetuate their business and the employees, but you know Bethlehem still can't pay their pensions. Car companies are collapsing. This has a lot to do with the cheap interest rates, and so what you have to do is find something that you can sell over and over and over. And advertising is also not something that really impresses me. I don't mind ads being tailored to my tastes when it comes to, say, YouTube. Like I would much prefer to see ads of something that I'm interested in, but I doubt I doubt their efficacy. I don't like that Instagram and Google are listening to me with my phone at all times. But I also, that's not necessarily a a deal breaker of pervasiveness. But it is a reality that we see all of these companies that are realizing that their true customer, or a customer, or an item that they can sell over and over and over, is information to advertisers, and this concept of the ad market. And I think that brings us to, out of the service economy into the sharing economy. And we've seen this in so many sectors coming out of the 2000s. Like, what has the internet done? It has given companies the ability to I don't know, to sell things over and over. We've seen it with vacation rent, second homes in VRBO and Airbnb. We have seen we've seen dating sites also go from like a subscription based model to selling your information. And not only that, but we've seen a great amalgamation of all these supposed sites. Like, when you think that getting on Zillow or Trulia or realestate.com is not going into the same database, you kid yourself. Those are all owned by the same company. And when you get on to any dating site that you go to, it's actually been bought and is owned by Match.com. When you get on VRBO or any other, there are two actually behemoths in the vacation rental, and that is VRBO / HomeAway. HomeAway is the parent corporation that's gone out and bought all these emerging sites, and Airbnb. And they had slightly different business models because one was originally like you were renting the home, and the other was you were renting the room. In the case of Airbnb, um, and especially with the onset of Airbnb and the likes of Uber, which was doing this with cars, Uber and Lyft. Um, the narrative and the thing that they called it was the sharing economy, and I always kind of laughed and said, but they're not sharing. When it was crowdsurfing.com instead of VRBO or Airbnb, that was actually sharing. But we left that model and instead went to this smaller, fractional monetization model of the sharing economy. And 23andMe is facing that same growing pain, I would imagine, and that's part of the concern. And you brought up OpenAI. I think a lot was made about this concern from the board that AI was going to take over the world. I think they were having, as the board, the same realization that a subscription model of selling access to ChatGPT 4 was not going to sustain the cost of the generation of that data, the running of the GPUs, and the configuring of the large language models. And they needed either state support from the likes of the defense industry from whatever countries they were operating in, or they needed to be incorporating the ad market, and maybe they were wary about what that looked like. But service economy is dead, and we're in like we talk also of Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Well, let's go back to that for just a second. When we say it's dead, there's this conception in the world of venture capital and Silicon Valley and whatever that there's these outsized profits to be made. And I think there were times where that was absolutely the case. You had massive disruption in existing businesses, and you had these companies that would come in and change the game so substantially that there were massive profits to be made. When we say there's not enough money, I mean, it's a matter of relative scale, right? And scope. If you think about something like 23andMe, like, could they have a sustainable business that does pretty well? Probably. I mean, can they make outsized profits where they're, at a $10 billion valuation or something? Maybe not. And I think that more speaks to the problem than it is that these things can't fundamentally work. So the only thing I'm maybe pointing a finger at or trying to dig a little deeper on is that this service thing is dead, because I think you can still provide a service. Like, I even think about things like there are companies that have been looking at digestive health. That's a good one, right? Like, your pet has some sort of a weird digestive health issue, and so you send in a bag of poop and they do an analysis on it. And a lot of that is very similar to what 23andMe is doing, right? They put it through some kind of a mass spec or a DNA analysis, and they say, oh, here's what's going on with your pet, and this is what you need to do to fix it. That's a service, and there's a certain amount of pets that need that over a certain amount of time, and you just have to kind of keep turning the crank on it. And as long as you keep your overheads relatively low and you run the business in an efficient way, like, it's a good business. But you're not going to make these crazy profits unless you do something which I would say is kind of nefarious or maybe not even ethical, is to somehow swoop up all that data and turn the model on its head, do something different than what your customers think you're doing, and then somehow make outsized profits on it. I think that it's entirely possible to make money cutting hair, providing a relatively modest service, but I don't think you can get this $10 billion valuation and get that Silicon Valley big money out of it. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that the way to set something like this up is it needs a substantive amount of capital. So however you're going to get a return on investment, because you need those DNA sequencers and the other stuff that allows you to run it.
Well, I think there's a huge problem with the VC SaaS concept of 45x returns, and I don't think that they're real at all. And I think this is why we see the growth of private equity, and and uh, and this again is a problem of low interest rates at the central bank. Number one, when you have this open market, or not truly an open market, and you have people who are either accruing debt or have money, cash in hand that's burning to make some investment, but they want to see 45x returns, and their promise is what? More customers, raising the subscription rates. Like in the end, they end up doing both, but but it becomes
It
a
seems mostly an unload and dump on the public
absolute.
market.
Absolutely, and in the case of say, Red Lobster, General Mills restaurants, Pizza Hut, or Kmart, Toys R Us, what was done with them? Well, they sold off the real estate, and isn't it nice how the real estate was actually appreciating, due to the nature of the, I don't know, the appreciation of real estate and how that's tied to, I don't know, an asset that everyone shares in the United States. But after you sell the real estate and rent it back to the franchise at exorbitant rates, they're going bankrupt, and so then they file for bankruptcy, and you sell it off at a deal to a private equity firm, and or that maybe that was already done, and the private equity was breaking it up and selling it. But um, this is why I call the world that we live in, say the world of sub 10% central bank interest rates, one of a mirage economy. Is that you have to go out and you have to start finding the advertising industry that lives on a that's not actually selling anything. I mean, how many ads have you
But
looked at in
but
your life that
yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go with that. If even that's kind of a mirage, because like, how effective are those ads? I know famously that people in traditional advertising said, "How do we even know that these campaigns are working?" And as advertising got more sophisticated and they moved towards some of the models that Facebook was putting out, where they said, "We can tell you a lot about whether your campaign is working. We can tell you your click through, and we can tell you exactly how much people are looking at it, your impressions, and you can track your campaigns and see if you're actually making money." But if everything becomes advertising, then that's all predicated on there being people who have money to spend on the products that we're talking about. And so if nobody's really making real products, they're just making these sham products that are all data aggregation. That to me feels like it's all an additional layer of smoke and mirrors that's going to collapse at some point too.
absolutely. And think even like before we went to like one rung down on the ladder to the marketing. There was also the Hewlett Packard printer concept of building cheap printers but selling the ink, and that only works for so many products. And we even see less quality in products. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe that has to deal uh, with realities in the supply chain, or in the cost of labor, the cost of resources. But whatever it is, we generally see people moving into this idea of marketing and the promise of marketing. And marketing does work, but whenever multiple firms are engaging in marketing, it's very hard to, there is a limited amount of attention and certainly a limited amount of cash in consumers. And so this is why like 45x usually ends up in bankruptcy, as far as I'm concerned, or ends up being bought by Google's, Apple's, and Microsoft's, and larger corporations that are buying their competitors so they can continue to make money, and they can continue to um, have the largest share of eyes and consumers, and they can continue to make money in marketing. Because if they were to have a competitor, then the returns and the narrative of their marketing would collapse. So I think so. This is where we're at with so many things, and we were promised cheaper taxi rides and cheaper hotel rooms or cheaper vacations with this notion of the sharing economy. And it is cheaper for a while, but as it gains the lion's share of the market, then those rates seem to go up. And these companies seem to be making a decent amount of money for their shareholders, and but then turning around and using that money to buy off any rising competitors. So when we have conversations like we did yesterday about Chia and what true decentralized blockchain chain solutions are, when I think about what the open market is, we are moving to in a world where the services that they are providing are actually written into protocol, and the role of them as the matchmakers or the middleman are removed. We're going to be entering into a very new economy. And I don't know.
Yeah, as we eliminate the rent seekers, the people who aren't really adding value, but they're inserting themselves into the process in some fashion and able to make money on the overall economy rather than directly adding value to it. I'm pointing at you, credit card companies particularly. Although you've created a product that's very interesting, taking 3% is it's pretty greedy.
Well, and by the way, did you see Donald Trump embrace the old Republican narrative of limiting the interest rates that credit card companies are charging to 10%? And I say the old Republican line with tongue in cheek, because because I can't imagine the kickback from the credit card companies or the banker Republicans, with the notion of that sort of limitation. Maybe they're excited about it. Maybe the credit card companies have looked at what happened with banks and the amount of money that banks were able to make on fees and confusing their customers and charging all these fees as their interest rates were reduced alongside or in correlation with those of the Federal Reserve.
No,
Um,
I missed that. What did he say? He said that he wanted to limit credit card companies to no longer be able to charge the 25 to 30% interest that they charge.
yeah, and I mean some of them up, at 40% or God knows how much, and this is the same line of Elizabeth Warren, and I think she's very earnest in her concern about consumers in the United States, around the world, who are using credit card and but then subjected to these enormous rates. So yes, Trump floated the idea, I believe, yesterday in a speech in maybe in Tulsa, not Tulsa, Tucson. I'm not sure where. He floated this idea, said it out loud in his way, that he would not only reduce taxes or remove taxes on tips and taxes on 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 earnings, overtime earnings past 40 hours a week. Now he's going to cap the interest rate fee that credit card companies can charge. So yeah, I think that well, blockchain crypto can provide services for banking. We've known for quite some time in removing the rent seeker, the middleman, but it's also going to have a massive impact on um, on these sharing economy kind of companies. Gene yesterday posted something with regards to how the open market and the offers are going to be incredibly impactful because things are for sale all the time. And I read it and I thought about it and I thought, the web the Web3 that we're talking about is going to be moving to a selling economy, and whenever we put the rewards, when we remove the capture of the money that goes to all of these rent seeking middlemen corporations, it's going to be incredible as to how that changes our world. Yeah, there you go. Cannot let banks charge 25 and 30% interest. So, well, if we do reduce that, then we're going to have to be very careful about the fees that they charge, because they can abuse their customers by finding different ways to make money than just one interest rate. So, and we've seen that certainly happen with the banks, um, especially like post 2008. There is also, there is to me, some emerging, selling economy companies, and I'm thinking of Salslot with Matthew Hintz on Chia. Um, one of the sectors that we've seen, uh, and I mentioned it earlier, that this amalgamation of data, big data, with a couple of different front ends exists in Web 2.0 is Zillow and Trulia. And there was once upon a time, before the internet and the emergence of Zillow, that if you wanted to buy real estate, that you had to go out and get the local paper. And this is part of the reason why people would take the weekend paper, and there was real estate ads in there, and more so than the weekly pages, and that's what you'd have to wait and get your hands on to find out what properties were for sale. Or maybe you went to the tax rolls for a different for a different method of buying property. But Zillow changed that, and I've been very interested. Was so very interested whenever Matt came on FOMO, to see what happens in a world where things are actually for sale on blockchain, and not just for sale on blockchain, but for sale at all the time, and offers can be made to the holders of an asset at any time. And when I think about, there's this the Klaus Schwab line of, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." Sometimes I think, if something is always for sale, that might be a happier future of what that's looking like. Because, like, even in the narrative of what do we own today, I mean, most people don't actually own their house. The bank owns their house, and they're constantly paying on the mortgage of that house.
Well, that is famously something that Michael Saylor has talked about. Like, what can you really own? And his assertion is Bitcoin is one of the first things that you could ever truly own, because everything else in some way is at the behest of other people who are really in control or in power over it. And that includes land and cars and anything that can be taken from you by force, and the government being the primary force producing entity that exists through taxation and whatever else it does. So it's hard to really think of the things that you can own that you can't carry on your back, or something like a private key that you can memorize your 12 words and then actually own something. So I definitely have heard that idea, and it resonates a lot that Bitcoin's one of the first things you can truly own.
The word "own" is so interesting to me. Are you aware that "own" is past tense of "owe"?
No.
Yeah. Um, own is a Norse, or whatever, an Old English word, and the strong verbs in Old English had a different conjugation than the weak verbs that we add the French ed to. So owed is the newer way of the past tense of owe. But yeah, own was once a concept of, oh, it's been paid off. I don't owe on it anymore, so I must own it. And when I think about what it means to actually own something, to possess something, or to be possessed by something, to be a tenant of something, it's, when we move into political systems without a king, without somebody who is in charge with that, well, or in a decentralized world, if you want to prove that you own something, you reveal a little bit of it, you give a little bit of it away, and that proves that you actually have it. So I think we're in for very different, and again, like this brings us back to this concept of things being for sale at all the time. and not only things being for sale, but the way that we've fractionalized the time of something being for sale. I mean, when you pay taxes, you pay taxes. Let's say you pay tax on a home, you pay it for the year. When you are renting, you're usually renting by the month, or maybe a week, or maybe an hour. But then you come to these notions of VRB and Airbnb. Um, uh, and WeWork, we haven't mentioned WeWork, where you were renting things for smaller increments of time. Well, as we reduce the transaction costs of selling things and listing things, we can be selling smaller and smaller items too, which again brings us back to Soul's Lot, and part of what they're incorporating into that, which I find fascinating, is fractionalizing ownership of a home and selling off pieces of it. So,
Speaking of things that you own and what it means in this day and age, I found this to be pretty interesting. So we might want to dig into this in a deeper conversation later, but it's something we've talked about extensively, is how you actually prove that you own something when you're the custodian, or when your only job is to own something on behalf of somebody else, to keep track of it and to be a custodian. And so River, who is a big Bitcoin custodian, they came up with this proof of reserve concept that is verifiable by the average mortal, maybe not so average, but by a sophisticated blockchain investigator, can actually review their proof of reserves and say that they actually have the Bitcoin they're supposed to have. So this all kind of ties in together when we talk about sharing economies, and we talk about who owns what and what does it mean to own something, especially in the day and age where oftentimes people aren't directly self-custodying whatever Web3 assets that they have, that they're actually relying on somebody else to do it. How can you prove, or how can they demonstrate to you that they're doing the thing that they say? So I thought this was pretty interesting, and I bring it up just because it seems appropriate in the context.
well, it's certainly, and I think we need to have a discussion about Bitcoin. I'd like to have a conversation with you about the Saifedean Amu and Michael Saylor uh, talk yesterday. I don't know if you caught it, but we should catch back up on developments going over in the Bitcoin world sometime next week. There's one other thing that occurs to me as we're having this discussion, and I don't know that I've ever brought it up, but do you know the origin of the word addiction?
I don't know that one either. I think usually if you're going to ask me that question, I'm not sure if it's rhetorical, but usually I won't. I'm not into etymology, and it's not something I typically spend a lot of time looking up. So tell me more.
Well, addiction, and I think you're more so than most people. You like words. Addiction, think about it, is a Latin word, and you go to a dictionary. What's in a dictionary? Words. Addiction is without a voice, but addiction does not come to us, or the concepts that we have of addiction today actually comes to us from Great Britain. And when you could not pay your rent, you could not vote, so you were addicted. You were without a voice.
Interesting.
Yeah. So not originally the notions of, and think about the natural progression of that. If you were quote unquote on drugs, if you were drinking too much alcohol or smoking too much opium, then you weren't able to go to work, and so you couldn't pay your rent, and so you were addicted without a voice. So anyway, I think that's plenty to throw on the table today. Really enjoyed having a breakdown of the sharing economy, and what sort of world we may be moving into. Um, are we are we having an episode tomorrow? Or are we going to knock it down to 4 days a week now?
We're down to 4 days a week now, so I don't think we put that on the Twitter account just yet, but we should. That was this thought that we had about what we're going to do with the show, and I think we owe the community a bit of a heads up on what we're doing. But we weren't planning on doing a show tomorrow, but I think we could if you wanted to. But yeah, it was I think our plan that we were not going to.
Let's keep it at 4 days. I have things that I need to catch up IRL. I did put together a group. We've had some community members, some listeners of the show who want to continue to have a conversation. We definitely would love that. I'm not so great about seeing all of the comments on YouTube and on Twitter, but if anyone wants to be a part of that message group, let us know, and we will add you to it, and we can share thoughts about Match.com and OkCupid and other aspects of the sharing economy, or whatever you want. And so people are welcome to join in there. And apart from that, I'll see you next week.
Okay, we'll see you next week.